here, and welcome to my wonderful, slightly echoey home office. Looked a lot different before COVID, but we've got it all fixed up now. As Jamie mentioned, my name is Brian Petro. I run a little ad agency. We've been around for 25 years, and I'm hoping to help you with some information about search engines. So we're a Google partner. This is my company. What that means is I don't work for Google, but I work with Google a lot. We've managed millions and millions of dollars worth of advertising through Google, as well as done a whole lot of SEO, search engine optimization for clients. And I want to share some of that information for you. Now, one of the challenges in putting together a webinar like this is that I realize that there are a lot of different levels of sophistication with all of you. So what I want to do is both do some high level, broad approaches of some general things, which frankly, a lot of you probably are aware of, but hopefully there'll be a few items in there you haven't heard. And then also pick some specific areas where we're gonna dive in a little deeper. So there should be something for everybody. I know Jamie is manning the chat. So if you have a question, you can chat that in. I think she's gonna hold those to the end, and we should have some time for questions at the end. So what we're going to cover, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Google works in general. And I am mostly going to be talking about Google because that's really the most relevant search engine out there. There are other engines, there is other traffic, but Google's really where it's at. So that's where we're going to be concentrating our time as far as search goes. So we'll talk in general how Google works, and then we'll also talk about paid ads on Google and things that can be done that aren't pay-per-click to try to improve your natural search results in Google. Now, there are some special challenges going on right now. I'll address those as we go as well. And really, number one special challenge is the fact that we've got this shut-in going on. And so to do sales and reach out to potential clients, electronic is the best way to go. Your website is, generally speaking, the hub of your information, because that's the area where you can control completely your message. So that is the most important area to reach out electronically. Social media is great, but honestly, you don't control everything about social media. Facebook and Instagram and all of those different channels, they have the ultimate end say in how everything's formatted and put together for you. Whereas on your website, you control it. It's the central hub. It's where you want to send everybody. And search is the way people get to it usually. So that's why search is important. So one special challenge is the fact that we are having to reach out electronically right now because of this shut-in. And the other special challenge is your particular industry, the solar industry. As you know, people spend a lot of money for leads in your industry, which means that trying to get better search results for your industry can be very challenging. So we'll talk about some of the ways that we can meet that challenge. Because if you are buying ads for your industry on Google, for example, you're probably spending a lot of money. So let's get through here and talk about this. How Google works. Google exists to make money for Google. Probably not exactly shocking when I say that, but really it's important to understand what Google's trying to do, because it flavors everything that we're trying to do. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you always have to remember Google's in it for Google. Everything that you see that Google does, self-driving cars and Yahoo and, excuse me, not Yahoo, YouTube, all these different properties they own, robotics, I mean, like just crazy stuff all over. It's all funded by paid advertising on Google. So this is their gem. This is their precious area where they make all of their money for everything else they do. So very important to understand that's what it's about. Now, the way they make money is by selling ads on search. And they will only do that if people feel like they are a reliable place to go to find the answers that to the questions that people are looking for online. So if they're a good search engine and they're trusted and people feel like, oh, if I go to Google, I'm going to find what I'm looking for, that gives them the audience they need in order to sell ads. If they, for some reason, were felt that in general, they weren't a great place to search for things, then there's going to be less of an audience and there's going to be less revenue coming into Google. So ultimately, in order to achieve their goal of making money, they want to have the best possible search engine out there. Now, results in Google come in a couple different flavors, but for the most part, let's divide it into paid results and natural results. So I'm going to go to my next slide here. And this, I actually had to do some search to find an example that showed everything I wanted. This is a typical search result page on Google. You can see up at the top, this particular search, I searched Bank of America. I actually had to search a lot of things in order to find one that showed everything I wanted to show. But this one, you can see the first listing at the top says ad next to it. So Bank of America paid to be there. That's a paid search result. Then after that, that next result is also Bank of America, but it doesn't say ad next to it. That is a natural search result. They did not pay to get there. You also see over on the right side, this block of information. That information comes, well, it can come from a couple different places, but most probably this information came, well, you can see right there. There's a couple different places it gets from. If you're really big, then a lot of times it'll come from Wikipedia. And that's where this came from, this information. It says there on the whatever, 5th line, it says Wikipedia. The other place that this information can come from is a Google My Business account. Now, I mentioned that in my last webinar. I won't have time to go into that now. But if you have not claimed your Google My Business account, you should just go and hit Google and search Google My Business. Or no, better yet, search for your company. Find a little block over on the right side, and there will be a button that says claim this, I own this, and then claim it. It's a free service, and obviously it would be good for you to control what information shows up on that right block. Then down in the bottom, you've got this map. I'm located in the Petaluma, Santa Rosa area of California, and so it shows a little map with Bank of America's, and then it's cut off at the bottom, but it shows for the more details about those 3 different locations. That is actually, they call that the snack pack of those areas that are on a map. So that, let's see if I can go back now. I just want to give you a feel, which are the natural search results, which was everything except for that first listing that was paid. Now, depending on the search that you do, sometimes there'll be 1 paid result on a page, sometimes there'll be 2, 3, 4 paid results, and then everything else is the natural search results. Now, Google tells me, and I've never seen any evidence otherwise, that buying into the paid area does not affect the results in the natural area. And I actually believe them. There are some things that Google says I don't believe, but this particular thing I do. I don't think it makes a big difference. So you can make that decision about if it's right for you to do paid advertising or not, independent of the idea that it'll affect your natural search results. So how does this work? What Google does is Google goes out and looks at every web page they're aware of, which is pretty much all of them, and indexes them. What it means is they grab a whole lot of little pieces of information about each page and store it in their database. It's called indexing. They send a little program out, it's called a spider, to look at all the pages, gather all this information. It is not an exact copy of your website, and save that information. Then what they do, and there's approximately 200 different little pieces of information about each page that Google grabs. Then Google has a program they use to decide when somebody does a search, they look at all of this data from the millions and millions and millions of pages that are out there, of all of the information that they've indexed, these 200 different variables on each one, and decide real time on the fly which page is the best answer to the question. Now that's on natural search results. They use this, it's an algorithm, it's a program they use. Now, that algorithm is private. Well, mostly private. There are some things about that formula that Google is very public about. And we'll talk about this more when I talk specifically about SEO. But there are some things that they are very private about. And there's a reason for that. Google has different interests than you do as a website owner. As I mentioned earlier, Google's interest is making money for them. And the way they make money is by having the best possible search results. Okay, so when somebody looks for something, they find it, that's good for Google. Google makes money. From a website owner's point of view, you want to make money for you. And so honestly, you don't really care if it's a especially good search. You want to make sure you show up. So even if somebody searched something that had nothing to do with you, it certainly wouldn't bother you any if you show up. So there's competing interests there. You want you to show up no matter what, and Google wants you to show up if you're the perfect search result. So because of those competing interests, Google has this algorithm they use to figure out what they should display, and they keep it private. Because if it wasn't private, then you would just reverse engineer their algorithm to have you show up first every time. So that's a little background about how Google works and why they do. So let's talk a little bit about paid search. As I mentioned, everything Google does is funded by paid search on Google. As a matter of fact, not only that, but you'll find that even if you aren't going to Google or to an ad agency and saying you want to buy ads on Google, they still sometimes will end up there. If you have a relationship with a newspaper or well, not that many people work a lot with phone books anymore, but phone books are the same thing. A lot of times, in addition to what they're selling you with their print stuff, they'll also say, oh, well, we're going to get you on Google and the search engines as well. Basically, what they're doing is reselling the same service that I'm talking about. The only difference is they usually they mark it up and they lock you into long-term agreements that Google doesn't. Again, we'll get into that more as well. But the general idea is you are picking a set of search phrases that you want people to end up on your website on if they search in Google. So if you have a website about green frogs, because I love using green frogs as an example, you might pick the search phrase green frog, toad, amphibian, slimy. I don't know, just make it up. And those terms you are going to bid on because it is a real-time auction for those phrases. You're going to write up a little ad copy. These are text ads during a search. So someone goes to Google and types in a search, and let's say it was green frogs, and you are going to bid, let's say you bid 50 cents on that term. So somebody does a search, and then Google will look at, this is the paid section at the top of the page, they'll look at everybody who has bid for that term, because there's other green frog companies out there that are your competitors, and it's a little more complicated than this, but the short version is, generally speaking, whoever bids the highest is going to come in first. Whoever bids second highest is going to come in second. There are some more twists and turns in there, but that's the short version. So if you bid 50 cents and you have a competitor who bid $1 and you have another competitor who bid 25 cents, you're going to pay, again, it's more complicated than this, but roughly 50 cents. But the good news is that's when someone actually searched your term, they're in your area, they read the ad, they clicked on it, and they went to your website. So it's, in theory, pretty qualified by the time they get to you. If someone searched and they didn't click on your ad, you don't pay a cent. So you can target really well. You target by phrases because you're picking phrases that are relevant to your company. You also can target geographically. So if you install in a certain county or a couple counties or cities or a state or a whole set of states, whatever it is, you can pick for your ads to show just in geography that where you work. You should be aware, it's a little scary how well Google actually knows where their searchers are. However, it's not perfect. So if you were to say you only wanted to service people in Texas, for example, it is possible that you get some ads displayed to people outside of Texas. Just be aware of that because Google will give you the impression, I mentioned earlier, I don't always believe them. Google will give you the impression that they really have this geo-targeting perfected when in fact they don't. Although they're generally right. So I'm not going to give them too hard of a time. So moving on from there, that's the targeting is usually done through the phrases and through geography. Best practices. Okay, so now I'm going to dig a little deeper about when these are set up. Now, again, you can set up these accounts yourself. You also can hide, typically that's how it's done. It's either you set up an account with Google Ads yourself. That's just search for Google Ads. Or you can hire a professional to do it with/for you. Either way is fine. I think with a small budget, it's probably pretty safe for you to play with it yourself. Although honestly, if you try yourself and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work, period. You might want to find somebody you trust who has done this for a while to give it a try too. It isn't unusual for us to, my company, again, this isn't a sales pitch for us, but in general, professionals, it isn't unusual for them to have a much higher return on investment than when people are doing it for themselves. There's a lot of levers and buttons and wheels to turn to get this thing going. Google, it's kind of the great thing about it and the horrible thing about Google is that there are lots of little details and things that you can use to dial it in, which is fantastic, but it also makes it really difficult to do, at least to do well. And let's say today you had it all figured out. I've got this nailed. I understand everything there is to know about Google Ads. Well, guess what? They're going to change it all on you tomorrow. So it's a moving target. So that being said, if you were to set up, one other thing that's important to mention for if you're doing this yourself, I mentioned that you pick where you want your ads to show. I picked that you pick what phrases you're going after. The other thing is it's pretty easy to set a budget. So you can say that you want to pay, $1 a click or whatever it is. In your industry, frankly, it's usually much higher than that. You also can say, but I don't want to spend more than $100 a day or $5 a day or $10,000 a day, whatever it is you want to spend. It's a daily budget, and Google sticks to that. There is a little bit of wiggle room. I mean, on each individual day, it could be a little high or a little low, but it does come out in the wash, and they do hit budgets because they know people would really be upset if they didn't. We have had occasions where Google has goofed up and they have shown the ad too many times. Comes to memory, we had a YouTube campaign. I'm not going to talk about YouTube this time, but that's also a Google property, and you buy ads for YouTube the same way you would here on Google Ads. And we had one where the client had a budget of, $10-20 a day, and we checked after one day, and they'd spent like $2,000 in a day. Orders of magnitude more than they were supposed to. And so we freaked out. Did we mess something up? And we checked everything and everything was right. And so we called Google up and they said, oh yeah, sometimes that happens. Yeah, don't worry about it. We won't bill you for it. Like, okay. And so we decided right then and there, in the future, if we're sure we did everything right and they're showing the ads too many times, we're just going to let it go. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened again since then. But so something to keep in mind. There's one other thing I'm going to mention while we're talking about that. That people, especially if they're new to this, are interested in. I didn't include this in my slides because honestly, it just hit me right now while we're talking. But I should mention click fraud. Okay, so a lot of people who are new to Google advertising, that's one of the first things they ask about is there some person somewhere being paid? They usually think of a dark room in a foreign country where they've got 50 people in there with 50 computers each just clicking on ads and costing you money. That's called click fraud. And I have not personally seen any evidence of anything substantial at all. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but again, I haven't seen it. In my opinion, if you go back to Google's driving forces, Google's in it to make money. If that was rampant, then it would endanger their whole business model. So they watch that. As a matter of fact, every month when you, they don't bill monthly. That's a whole nother conversation. When you get your invoices from Google, or they just charge your credit card, is usually how it works. They do self audits and credit you back if they think something doesn't look right. And generally speaking, I actually believe them. I did have a client once that had a substantial daily budget, enough that we went and hired an auditor just to check. This was a company that specialized in auditing for click fraud. It wasn't even because we thought there was any fraud out there. It was just this client was spending enough money that it felt like it would be a wise thing for us to double check with a third party. And they looked and they didn't find anything. So as a general rule, I don't worry a lot about click fraud. there probably is some ambient low level of fraud out there. But honestly, there isn't another choice of anywhere else to go. So you end up having to ask yourself, can I make money with this at whatever level of fraud that there is? And it's a yes, no decision. Am I working with Google or not? Because there's no place else to go. You end up deciding I can make money with Google or I can't. So there's my spiel about click fraud. Generally speaking, I don't think it's a big concern. Best practices. So best practices, within an ad campaign at Google, there is a hierarchy. There's the, I didn't turn my phone off the way I should have, so it's vibrating right now, and I'm attempting to turn it off. Or we could just throw it in a drawer. Let's throw it in a drawer. Very professional, I know. There's a hierarchy. So you have your account, and then within the account, they have campaigns, and within the campaigns, they have ad groups. I know these terms don't necessarily mean anything to you, but the important part to take away is that each level is for doing a different thing. One level is for setting geo-targeting, and the campaign level is mostly for setting geo-targeting and budgets, whereas the ad group level is mostly for segmenting by topic. So again, the important part to know is that there is a hierarchy. It's important to understand what that hierarchy is for, and do some research on that if you are doing your own campaign. Or reach out to me later. My email address will be on here. I'm happy to help you. So best practice number one, segment by ad group. So what you want to do, let's just pretend that you're an installer. Probably not too difficult for you to pretend that. And you install both PV and water. I'm just making this up. Well, you might have ads that you run that are, you want to segment. You don't want to just say, we do all solar, run an ad for all solar, show the same ad copy, we do wonderful solar, hire us, and then dump all those people on your home page, we do all solar. That's not going to be as effective as, for example, segmenting into two groups. You have one ad group where you're saying, you know, solar panels, photoelectric, those kind of search terms. And then you have ad copy that goes along with those that's talking about, you know, our high quality panels are guaranteed, or we have the best installation of the panels, or, you know, we can do ground mount, blah, 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 whatever it is, ad copy that matches the search phrases. And then you send them to a landing page on your website, if they click on your ad, that is specifically about the PV stuff. It's specifically about panels, and so you follow that all the way through. Same thing with, like I said, let's say you were talking about hot water. Same thing, you'd have hot water related phrases with hot water related ad copy, and land them on your page is specifically about that. You're gonna have a much better return on investment if you follow that all the way through. If you group them all together, what you end up with is somebody may be looking for battery backup, and instead of having all this ad copy and landing them on your battery backup page, you're just giving them all this kind of general stuff about how we're the best at solar, and you land them on your home page. It's not going to do as well, especially if you have a competitor who's doing what I just described and feeding them information just about battery backup. So I'm covering a couple of my points all at the same time. My first point was segment the ad group, and I also talked about don't land on the home page. So if you are going after some general terms, then maybe it's not such a bad thing to land them on your homepage. But in a perfect world, you want to have these different topics that you're going after segmented and land them on a page that's about that topic. So I said here, don't land on homepage. Again, you know the rules so you can break it. There are times when it makes sense to do that, but in general, you want to be as specific as possible. One of the reasons you want to be specific, and I'm jumping around here to some extent, is because of your industry. The solar industry, especially those broad general terms, they're going to be expensive. So if you can get the more specific terms that there isn't much competition, because remember, this is a live auction, the more specific you can get, potentially you can get less expensive terms. And I'll touch on that some more. set the appropriate search term types. So I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but you should be aware that Google has different types of search terms. So let's say your search term, we'll go back to green frogs, okay? There is a broad match, an exact match, a phrase match, a negative match. There are different types of term matches that you can use on those. And they all equate back to how close the searcher had to be when they were typing their search to your phrase that you're bidding on in order to trigger Google to show your ad. By default, Google wants to use broad match for everything. And they want, if somebody searches for anything remotely like the term that you're buying, they want to show your ad because that's Google and they want to make money. But you can tighten it up. You can go to phrase match or exact match, and you can require that Google say, no, only show my ad if this exact term is used. So just pay attention to search types. Also, I mentioned negative types. Negative types are valuable because you can actually say, but don't show my ad if this term's in there. So for example, the classic negative keyword that pretty much everybody wants is the word free. If somebody searches, free installation, free solar installation, and you have broad match solar installation, that could trigger your ad. Well, that doesn't do you any good. So if you have the negative keyword of free in there, then Google will block and your ad won't show. So that's good. Moving on. Bidding types. There are lots of different ways to bid. So far, I have explained this saying, oh, you bid 50 cents for this term, your competitor bids $1 for this term, another competitor bids 25 cents for this term. It's actually more complicated than that. Well, you can do it that way. It's just, especially if you have 1,000 terms you're going after, and you might want to do 1,000. Again, I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. It would be very challenging to try to manage a budget where you're bidding individually on each term in a competitive way when you're going after that many phrases. So one of the bid options that I like a lot is auto bid. And basically what you do is you're telling Google, look, this is my daily budget and I don't really care what to bid. What I want you to do is to use your wonderful program to bid for me in a way where I will get the most possible clicks per day with any given budget that I'm giving you. And again, that's actually an area where I trust Google. Occasionally I'll override it, but if I look at their best interests, if I already have carved out a specific budget that I'm saying, you're going to get this budget, Google, I am giving you this money, I think it's in their best interest to show my ads as many times as possible and make me feel like I'm getting good value. So I actually trust auto bid. Once you get deeper into it, there's another bid method that I think is interesting as well. You can actually bid per cost per conversion. So what that means is, let's say I'm sending people to a request bid form, which would be a very good landing page, by the way. I haven't talked much about landing pages, but your landing page, wherever you're sending people from these ads, needs to be a call to action, form, quick pitch. The goal is to convert these things to leads. So you have to run the campaign for a little while, but it is possible to bid to Google saying, I'm not interested in paying per click. I want to pay per person who actually fills out my form. And you say, I'm willing to pay $25 for every person who fills out this form who comes from you. And I'm not paying per click, I'm going to pay per conversion. In actuality, you do pay per click, but they adjust your bid automatically to try to get, again, they have to do some testing to try to get to your $25 per conversion or whatever it is that you set that at. So it is possible to bid that way too. That's very interesting. It's a little more sophisticated than the obvious way. Ad copy variations. This is pretty straightforward. See, I put away my phone and now I don't know what time it is, so I'm trying to keep a track on how I'm doing time-wise. Copy variation. So we talked about the fact that these are text ads that show. Just be aware that you can put lots of different versions of your ad copy. You don't want just one. Because if you do 10 different versions of your ad copy for each little ad group that you've got, like I said, maybe you've got an ad group about solar batteries, you can write 10 different ads, and Google dynamically tests all of them and then shows the one that works the best, that gets the most clicks for you. So it's always better to have more ad variations that you can experiment with. Accurate budgets. So as I mentioned, you can set daily budget. That sounds pretty straightforward, which it usually is. One thing that I would comment is if you're running a more complex campaign that has multiple campaigns and ad groups running, by default, you set up budgets per campaign. I mentioned earlier that that's at the campaign level. That's where you generally set geographical targeting and budget. However, you can, if you want, share budgets between campaigns. I like doing that. The reason I like doing that is because let's say you have a total budget of, let's just pretend you're going to spend $200 a day. Okay, so this is small numbers here. And you have 2 different campaigns you're running for 2 states. Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure how much of the budget each state is going to use. I have to set up 2 campaigns because they're 2 different geographical areas, one in each state. So in the olden days, I used to have to guess and go, oh, I think it'll be 50-50. And then one state may max out and turn off because you ran through your budget in a day. And the other state may not use it all and have the budget sitting there. Whereas if you share the campaigns, then it just runs them as often as people come through. The other thing, as far as accuracy of budgets goes, we've taken over campaigns before where people have a budget set of, let's just pretend it was $200 a day. But the campaign wasn't set up very effectively, and it was actually only spending $50 a day. And it's possible for some relatively minor adjustments to be made, and then all of a sudden it spends $200 a day, which might come as a big surprise to your CFO, who is used to seeing $50 a day charges come through. So my point is, if you really want to spend $50 a day, that's what the budget should be set at. Don't set it higher than what you actually want to spend, even if you are spending less than that. I've seen that happen as well too. So set the budgets at what you really want to spend, share them as needed. Another good reason to share the budget is because it is easier to make sure you stick to your budget. If you have a whole bunch of campaigns and all these different budgets, it gets complicated. Whereas if you say, look, I'm going to spend $500 a day, done, and you share that across all your campaigns, then it's really easy to look at one place and see, I have everything set correctly and I'm not spending more than I meant to. Long tail. Okay, let's talk about long tail. I mentioned the idea of having 1,000 or more search phrases. The reason for that is that it's this. This is a little graph. On the left side, it shows search volume, like how many people search this term. On the right, on the bottom, it talks about conversion rate. Conversion rate is, let's just for sake of argument say this is how many people turn into customers, okay? So what you'll notice is the more general phrases, like in this example, tomato plant. In your industry, it might be solar panels. It gets searched a lot, but it's so general that it doesn't turn into business as often as some other phrases. And what they're not showing here is it's also one of the more expensive phrases to bid on because it's really general and popular. As you move along down the scale and come up with phrases that are more specific, like instead of tomato plant, when to plant tomatoes, what you'll find is, yeah, there's less people searching it, which also means there's less people competing for that phrase. It's probably cheaper to bid on that phrase. And it's more specific. So if your company was selling tomato plants, for example, that seems more likely if somebody's saying when to plant them. Yeah, it doesn't guarantee you they're a customer, but it's more likely they're going to buy than someone who just searched tomato plant. You're getting more specific. Then moving along further down the line, so again, my example for industry, we started out with solar panels. Maybe the midway one might be, I'm just making this up, solar panel installation. Okay, so now we're actually talking about installers instead of just solar panels in general. Let's say that's a mid-range one. Then as you go further, you might have one really specific, like solar panel installation X county, whatever your county is, or ground installation, or something, solar panel ground install. I like the geography ones because I think it cuts out a lot of competitors. And you might say in specific city or even a specific state. Well, now you're getting really specific. It means there's less people searching that, but the people who do are more serious about actually doing business with you. So it has the wonderful mix of both being cheaper per click on this auction and has a better chance of actually turning into customers. So as you see that swooping out to the right, that is called a long tail. And that's why when people are running paid ads, a lot of times they will come up with long lists of very detailed phrases. And it's one of the key ways to try to compete in industries like yours that have really expensive clicks, is to try to come up with some really specific original phrases that maybe other competitors aren't going after. So that is long tail. Let me go back over here. Last thing I just want to mention, voice search is a thing. So starting a couple of years ago, Google was saying that there were more people searching on mobile devices than there were on desktops. And that's old news. I mean, that was a couple of years ago. So as that continues to get more and more popular, we're also seeing a rise of more and more people using a voice search instead of actually typing in a search into their mobile device. On an Android device, it's Google Assistant. On an iPhone, it's Siri. So what's important to know is, well, there's two pieces. One is when you're buying those search phrases, look at phrases that actually people would say into a phone. Solar installers, solar contractors near me. Okay, that would be a phrase that would be a good phrase because it's a kind of human search phrase that people would use in a voice search. The other thing to keep in mind is that these online reviews, and I mentioned these in my last webinar, online reviews matter because Siri looks at Yelp reviews when it decides who to give as a search result. So again, I've mentioned Yelp is the company I love to hate, but that doesn't mean that the search results in Yelp don't matter. So you need to pay attention to online reviews. Same thing with Google. Google uses the reviews that they collect on Google My Business. I mentioned that earlier. Those, you need to pay attention to those reviews because when voice search is done, that's one of the things they'll look at. Jumping forward, I'm also going to talk about SEO, but for natural search results, keeping in mind voice search, it's a good idea to have a frequently asked questions page on your website, and those questions, word them the way a human would. So on your frequently asked questions page on your website, have questions like, why does my power go out even though I have solar when the power company turns off our electricity? Okay, so that's like this big long phrase. Obviously, it could use a little polish. But my point is, wording that whole thing out the way a human being might form that question on your FAQ page could be helpful in getting natural search results along that as well. So things to watch out for with paid search, and I'm spending a lot of time on paid search. And I'll explain a little bit about that too. Things to watch out for, really general terms, just talked about that. Third parties. So you can hire ad agencies like mine or the phone book or newspapers who resell these services. Watch out for big markups because it isn't necessary. Watch out for long-term contracts with third parties about Google advertising because Google, literally, you can turn Google off by the minute, on and off. So the only reason any company will want to lock you into a long-term contract to run Google ads is for their benefit. It's not because Google requires it. So just be aware of that. Watch out for overbidding on ads because it's very possible that because it's an auction, that your competitor may have gotten carried away with the auction and is bidding too high, which means your the cost per conversion for some given phrase, nobody can make money at that rate. you don't want to be bidding in that. Let them lose money on it. You don't need to. Um, ignoring your campaign. This is not a invest and forget kind of a thing. For clients that we run campaigns for, we're looking at these. It really depends on the size of the campaign. If you're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every month, well then honestly you need to be watching this daily. If you're spending $1,000 a month, maybe you just want to go in once a month and look at it and make improvements and report back. So the amount of money you're investing is an indicator of how much time you need to spend on an ongoing basis for maintenance, but you definitely can't just set it up and forget. This is an ongoing process. Google has all kinds, okay, I'm going down my list here. Another gotcha. Google has all kinds of recommendations about how to improve your campaigns, and they will be very helpful in giving those to you. Some of them are helpful, but I find that often one of their recommendations is to raise your budget. So just be aware, Google's in it for Google. It isn't necessarily always the best idea to raise your budget just because Google said to. I mentioned about the hierarchy of these within a campaign of account, and then campaign, and then ad group. You need to know what those are for and use them correctly. When they're using correctly, it just makes a big mess, and I've taken over accounts like that. Most of the ads we've been talking about the whole time are search ads, which are these text ads. But be aware there are also display ads, images, more like what you think of traditionally in ads, that you can also buy on Google. Generally speaking, they have a lower return on investment than search. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying you probably want to do search first. I also mentioned negative keywords earlier. You want to make like free. Remember I mentioned free. Make sure you use negative keywords, but use them correctly. Don't over or underuse them. That can be a gotcha. Natural search results. So natural search results, I think the important thing to take away about what you can do to improve your natural search results is that it's not an easy thing. I think that there's a natural inclination for, especially if you're new to it, to think that because I'm paying per click for paid ads and I'm not paying per click for natural results, then the natural results are automatically better and cheaper. That's not the case. It's a long-term investment to work on improving your natural search results that frankly is rather hard to track results from the efforts you put in. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do. We totally do it for clients. I make sure clients understand that the wording I use when I'm talking to clients is that it can take months or years to see results from a good SEO campaign. It is not by any means automatic. Whereas on the paid stuff, we can show results in a couple days. So a lot of clients do both. They're investing for the long term and they need results today. As I mentioned, Google looks at about 200 different variables when they're deciding what natural search results they should give. Some of the most important ones are, number one, just make sure your website works and it's secure. I mentioned in my presentation before that there's this little padlock. If your website is set up securely, it looks like this. See in the upper left-hand corner, I've got that little padlock there. That should be on your website. Google will punish you if that's not there. Talk to your web developer. That's one of the things they look at. It's not huge, but it is something that you should have. Google likes if websites have those secure certificates on them. Your website should have good content. I mean, ultimately, Google's they want to serve the websites that are answering the questions that people are asking. So you need to actually have those answers. Go out and do some research about what are the questions that your target customers are asking online, and then create content for your website that answers those questions. You need good content. Titles are important. So titles are, I'm going to go back to the same slide here. Up at the top here, you can see where I circled Soligent's titles. That's the titles I'm talking about, are those lines that are on the little tabs on the top of the browser. So having descriptive titles, you don't want titles on your website that are home, about, contact. Those aren't search phrases. You want to have ones that are like solar installation Petaluma, because I'm in Petaluma, that's my town. You want to have descriptive, good target The phrases that you want to show up in natural search results, those need to be in your titles. So those are important. Backlinks. Backlinks are Google's secret sauce, okay? And it's not very secret. But what made Google Google? Way back when this first started, Yahoo was first the king. And the way that Google stole Yahoo's title was by coming up with an automated way for the internet to vote on which websites were best. And then Google would use that information to serve natural search results. And that voting system is backlinks. Basically, what Google does is it checks all of the internet and sees how many good quality websites that are relevant to your website link to yours. And if all of the things were the same, if you and your competitor had the same exact website with the same content, everything was the same, but you had twice as many links to your website from other websites than they had, you're going to show up first. Backlinks are very important. The easiest way to get backlinks is to go out and participate in real conversations online about your industry. So you go find blogs and forums that are talking about solar installation, and then you set up an account with that blog or forum. Usually they will ask for your website address when you set up the account, and then you go and you actually involve yourself in these conversations. You have to carve out some time, set yourself an hour a week, 2 hours a week, whatever it is, every month, and be strict about it and hold yourself to it. And you can also hire companies that will do this for you. You don't want to hire companies that you're just buying links from. That is actually a bad idea. Google will figure that out. But I'm talking about really being a good citizen, going out and helping the internet with some good information that people are asking questions that they're not getting good answers for. So I think of this like camping, where you want to leave the campsite cleaner than when you got there. It's the same thing with this. We're going to go out to these blogs and forums, and we're going to leave them with better information they had than when you got there. So backlinks, that's actually one of the most ignored areas. This is Google's secret sauce. This is what they do. So working on those backlinks is important. And then mobile ready. Google really cares if your website is mobile ready. There is a Google tool out there. It's like Google Mobile Tester. I don't remember the exact word, but if you search Google Mobile Tool, you'll find it. And it will rate how mobile ready your website is. And if your website does not rate well with their tool, they will punish you in natural search results for that. It's also important to know, this is how important they think mobile is. They think it's so important that when they go out and index the internet, when they do go out and get those 200 pieces of information about every page out there, they are not grabbing the desktop version anymore. The information they're grabbing is from the mobile version, because they think mobile is first. That's how people are searching, and that's what we care about. So keep in mind about that. One last thing about search engine optimization that I'll mention is that local search is super important, especially for you guys in your industry. I think it's very important that you try to optimize for phrases that include your town, towns around you, your state, geographic, because it's a way to separate yourselves from all of the other traffic out there that isn't relevant to you, is by geography. And one of the good ways to improve your local search results is to take advantage of that Google My Business account that I mentioned earlier. So find that account and grab it and use it. We went through that one already. So we covered a lot of stuff here. We talked about how Google works, why they work, what they're doing. We talked about paid search a lot. We talked about SEO. It's important to also mention some things we didn't cover. We didn't cover display ads. I mentioned those are the graphical ads. That's because those aren't search, and this discussion was about search. But it is possible to buy graphical ads and show them to people who aren't searching for you. That's a whole nother talk I'd be happy to have, but that's not this one. Also YouTube. I mentioned in passing that we have run YouTube campaigns. Video is a fantastic way to reach out to people. And if you put together some, at this point, oh, I hate to say this out loud, but at this point, mobile phones have such good video quality. You can almost get away with shooting professional videos on mobile phones. I'm actually seeing that right now on some of these reality TV shows that aren't able to shoot because of the COVID shut-in. I'm thinking of a couple singing ones that my family watches. They are actually shooting stuff that they're broadcasting on iPhones. So that was very interesting to me. So once you put together these videos, again, they need to be professional, but you don't have to spend $1 million on them. We can promote them on Google Ads and get eyeballs in front of them. I also didn't mention Facebook. I know Emily did a presentation the other day about Facebook. I'm sure she talked about some paid ads there, but there's a whole area there. As far as hiring a consultant, I mentioned you can do this yourself. You can. I would be cautious of consultants that specialize in SEO, in the natural search results. I don't have enough time to get into it really deeply, but I'll tell you, I've run into a lot of clients who have been burnt by SEO specialists. That's not to say there aren't some good guys out there. I just am saying I would be careful with that. As far as hiring somebody to help you with the paid ads, there's a whole lot of good consultants out there. What I would look at is experience. I would look at if they are certified by Google. They don't have to be. That's a good sign that they have experience. And I would also look at their business model. How are they charging you? The way I like to do it, so this is the way we do it, is for most clients, the cutoff for us is about $10,000 worth of ad spend per month. For anybody who's spending less than $10,000 a month on ads, we just bill our time. And I think that's there are plenty of other consultants that do it this way. So this isn't a pitch for us, but that way the account, honestly, you could fire that consultant. The account is in your name. They don't mark it up. You're paying Google directly on your credit card or having them bill you. And you're just paying them by the hour to run it. I think that's a good way to run a smaller campaign. As it gets bigger, there's a point where you want to start switching over to a traditional ad agency model, which is a percentage of spend. It's usually somewhere between 10 and 15% of your ad spend is what you would pay an agency to run it for you. I think that's a good way to run a bigger account. Frankly, if you pay by the hour, at some point as the account gets big, you're actually incentivizing hours instead of incentivizing results. So I think a percentage of spend is actually a good model. It just doesn't work on a small account because there isn't enough spend there to pay the professional what they need. So anyway, that's my spiel about hiring consultants. But again, you can do this with yourself. I would definitely test with a small budget. It's one of the beautiful things about paid campaigns with Google is that you can test small budgets, see what works, and then ramp it up as needed. Jamie, that is what I've got for you. I don't know if there were questions or not.